Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Outside Insider podcast here on Philly Sports Network with myself, Liam Jenkins. It's the second episode in as many days. We're hopefully going to have a third tomorrow as well, the day before the NFL draft. But for today, we're going to go right back to basics. We're going to go round by round, look at the Eagles' options, some of the big misfits, potentially some trades as well that could lurk in the coming days. So if you're new to this podcast, this isn't as sassy as we usually are. I think, Lambrini Liam's been kept to one side for now. It's all going to be super serious for the next few days. But we're going to bring on Andrew DiCecco from the Eagles Wire, someone that I've honestly admired for quite some time now. Very hard-working guy, has put out some fantastic draft content and has been on the Pro Day circuit as well. So there'd be no one better to come in and break down the players that the Eagles should be potentially looking at over this weekend. So if you're new, you're not subscribed yet, now's the time to do so. We're on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube and all the other ones except Google Music Play Store for some reason. But I really appreciate you taking the time to just hit that subscribe button, leave a rating on iTunes if you haven't already. I promise I'll give you a soppy speech if you do. But without further ado, we're going to get into a wealth of Philadelphia Eagles draft talk, starting with round one, going all the way through, looking at all the potential options and sleepers and stars. So joining me now on the Outside Insider podcast is someone that I've been wanting to get on for quite some time and that I've been, a little bit kind of flustered about when it comes to his draft content this season. If you're not following him already, you really should be on Twitter. Andrew DiCecco from the Eagles Wire. How are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to see how this crazy week unfolds.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster for the last few months, is typically the NFL offseason usually is, but for yourself especially, kind of seeing you go from contributing with the Eagles Wire, then to attending pro days and getting on that circuit and doing a lot more breakdowns and that sort of thing. How's this experience been for you? Has it been as wild as you expected?
Yeah, it's been unbelievable. I've had an awesome opportunity to be able to go to these different pro day circuits and go to the East-West Shrine game and see all these players up close and you really build these relationships with a lot of these guys. So I'm really excited for them. This is a big weekend for them.
Absolutely. I think that's been one of the big things about your content is looking at the smaller guys and the sleepers and seeing how they always tend to have the more underdog stories, right? And it's the harder backgrounds and the harsher realities of football setting in. So just kind of who's been the one sleeper that you've developed that big draft crush on or that you would want to see kind of land in Philadelphia?
There's too many, man. I can go Jimmy Moreland. I know you're a big Jimmy Moreland guy.
Oh, I love Jimmy Moreland.
Mike Dogley from Temple. Me and Mike connected throughout this process. Tim Harris from Virginia, cornerback. Donnie Lewis Jr. There's so many. It's been...
For me, I think one of the big things when I started interviewing players was trying to find that human connection. Almost take away the fact that every draft interview straight away is going to be about your stats and your production and your fit, but you kind of want to know the person almost like behind the face mask. And that was the one thing that I found in your content as well. What was the inspiration with that? Was that something you'd always wanted to do, or was this like something new that just happened through getting to talk to those guys?
I've always been fascinated with the process that goes into it. That the lesser covered guys are some of the harder workers in the game. To be able to have to scratch and claw to find your way onto a team or onto find playing time. I can relate to that because nothing's ever been handed to me either. And I kind of like bringing their stories to light, and they really do have a lot of interesting stories to share with everyone.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I was in the exact same boat, so I think we both rated for a lot. I remember we started talking, it must have been, close to a year ago now, must be something like that. Seeing each other kind of rise up through this entire process, it's been a lot of fun. So let's get straight into the NFL draft. Obviously, we're a few days away now. First round, Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock at 25. What are your projections for that pick? Are they staying at 25? Are they moving? Or who's the guy they're looking at?
If Cody Ford falls somewhat in the 20 to 21 range, if he's hanging around, I can see them certainly making a play for him. But if they stay at 25, I'm looking at Cleveland Farrell from Clemson. You look at the defensive ends on the Eagles roster, and aside from Derek Barnett, who's coming off an injury of his own, you really don't know what you have in Josh Sweat. And I really think you need that young bookend in the first round to kind of team up with Derek Barnett to form that formidable line for years to come.
I mean, I'm all in on like Clelin Ferrell. I think he's an exceptional talent. My one concern would be that if you draft another defensive end in the first round, knowing that you've just penned, obviously, Brandon Graham to an extension, I know Chris Long won't be around forever, or at least after next season at the very latest. Vinny Curry could be the same. But would it not be a slight indictment on Derek Barnett to kind of say, because surely by this point, this will be his third year, former first round pick, you're expecting that starting potential. And if you draft another one, is that not kind of saying they're not sure about Barnett, or is that for a long time, or am I kind of overlooking that a bit?
I suppose he could look at it that way, or he could also look at it as, okay, they're looking to surround me with younger talent so I can grow with this person, and we can kind of take the league by storm for a number of years.
It's interesting. I think Derek Barnett, to me, is one of the most polarizing players on the team. There's either the people that are absolutely besotted with him and love this idea that he bends so well and he's so explosive and he makes these flashy plays. Then there's the other half that I think I'm kind of on the fence between, of seeing a player that shows up occasionally but can just disappear if he's asked to stay on those longer shifts or the longer drives, and he'll have one or two big plays and then sort of just settle down a little bit. It's a consistency piece for me. I mean, what are your opinions on Barnett and his, I guess, long-term role with the team? Is it going to be a starting thing, or is he going to be behind Brandon Graham, or what?
Another part of me being attracted to drafting Ferrell at 25 is going to exactly going to your point, where he does seem to wear down as the game drags on. He comes out with a ton of energy, and then it seems like as soon as these tackles start laying on him throughout the game, he starts to lose some of his burst.
It's interesting. I think it's the same thing with the interior line as well. A lot of people looking at a guy like potentially Christian Wilkins or Jeffrey Simmons or Tillery, like around that 25, potentially second round range. What are your opinions on that? Because I know there's been a lot of talk recently about trading up for a guy. There's been a lot of talk about moving back in the second round now and you can get a guy. Do the Eagles need to draft a guy that early? Because in my opinion, the way I see it is you've got Cox and Malik Jackson. The big thing they lost last year, outside of Timmy Jernigan, was the depth. Because in 2017, you had Bo Allen and Destiny Via. Both of them accounted for a combined, I think it was 64% of snaps. You lost that. You had Bruce Hector, a bunch of practice squad guys kind of filtering in and out of that rotation that were unable to deliver the consistency or that push needed to get the defensive ends into the pocket. So I would be more than happy to sit in the 4th or 5th round and pick up a Carlin Saunders or a guy like that and allow him to develop and become that rotational piece rather than just stacking it unnecessarily.
I agree 100%. If you're looking for a defensive tackle, the mid rounds are where you can certainly find some value there. Edge is a position where after you see Chase Winovich go off the board somewhere between 35 and 45 by my estimation, that's when you start to see a significant drop-off in talent, in my opinion. You have your Charles Omenihu in the middle of the second round, but after that, to find an immediate contributor on the edge, it's a little bit scarce there. So defensive tackle, Saunders is great, Michael Dogby's great, and my guy Daniel Wise is great, and you'll appreciate this story. I had a chance to talk to Daniel Wise at the East-West Shrine game, who also compared his game to Fletcher Cox. But when I walked up to him, I told him, I said, hey, I'm Andrew, I'm with the Eagles Wire. And he goes, you're from Philly yourself? And I'm like, yeah, you're from Philly? He's like, nah, you just look like you're from Philly. I could tell. You got that look.
That's mad.
I don't know what that look is, but
well, I mean, maybe it's the art. I mean, like, as far as I know, you're quite a well-built guy. Like, you work out, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's that. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have that. If someone looked at me, I would just get...
I don't know.
I don't look like a Philly guy at all. My favourite thing to do with NFL prospects...
I told him. I did tell him. I said, if you end up in Philly, I said, cheesesteaks on me. And I need to find out what it means to look like a Philly guy.
It's my favourite thing with prospects.
I need the answer to that question.
That's okay. Yeah. So my... I guess it's like being British, okay? Like, and obviously having a voice like a 15-year-old girl, that doesn't help me in many situations. But knowing that if I'm going to talk to an NFL prospect, like, I deliberately won't tell them or the agent or whoever that I'm British. I'll just kind of wait for the call to happen, pick up, and I'll be like, hello. The worst one was I think it was a defensive tackle out of Lamar. It was like last year, and I waited and there was like loads of crackling up on the other end, and I was like, okay, give me 2 seconds, I'm going to hang up and recall you. And he was like, yes, ma'am, no problem. And I was like, whoa, well, okay, hold on. When I recall, do I tell them that I'm a guy? Do I play off that I'm a woman? Like, what's the vibe here? It's not good.
Man, that's funny.
It's, you win some, you lose some, okay? It's catching them off guard, because they would probably expect... Oh, wow, Siri's just booted off, okay. You start talking to them, and they're kind of assuming, like, an American, maybe a butch kind of sounding voice, and they get, hello, do you play football? And they're just completely thrown off. It's fun.
Catch them by surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so round 2 then. We'll kind of go round by round and see what we can hook up with. 53, I'm locked in on Darrell Henderson at this point. I don't think I've budged from that in about 2 months. But there have been some mock drafts where he's sliding down a bit further. There have been others where he's a bit higher. I know you're personally obviously quite attached to Titus Howard and that sort of thing. Is there going to be a chance that Titus Howard goes in the first? Are you reaching if you take him at 25? Like, what's the strategy there? Because I know Jeff Stoutland has seemingly got heart eyes for him.
You know exactly where I was going. So, ideally, Titus would be my guy. He would be my guy at 53. But I've been told that there's multiple teams that have a late first round grade to early second round grade on Titus. So I'm not certain that he'll be there at 53 because a lot of teams seem to be, enamored with him late in the process here. So, he had 24 official visits. So certainly it's a risk to see him there at 53. But can you take him at 25 just because another team might have him higher on their board than you do? I don't know.
It's interesting because the other tackle I'd liken in that picture would be someone like Andre Dillard, who has kind of got this knock of not being a starter-ready guy that would take a year or two developing. And I'm like, well, if you're going to spend a first round on Dillard, I don't see how taking a developmental talent in Titus Howard is any less, because the athletic profile that Howard has, to me, far outweighs what Dillard brings to the table.
Right, absolutely.
So it's one of those odd ones. Like, the offensive line drop between round 1 and like downwards, especially at tackle, is quite heavy. But it depends what you look for. And if I'm the Eagles and I'm looking at this from a long-term standpoint, I think Vitai's serviceable. I think he's proven that starting at both right and left and pretty much wherever at this point. He's always been thrown into the deep end. Beneath that, you've got Jordan Mailata, who everyone's in love with, but no one really knows how long it's going to be until he plays a meaningful snap of football or if he's ever going to become a starting tackle. The drop between those two is quite substantial. I don't think you need to replace Vaitai right away. You're looking for a happy medium where if Vaitai gets thrown in, you've got a backup ready in an absolute emergency. And to me, you can get that in, the 4th or the 5th round.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. There's tons of talent there that I got to see at the East-West Shrine game that will be there in the middle rounds there if they so choose to go that route.
What would you say? Okay, so 50. So if you've got 53 and 57, obviously 2 picks. I mean, are you looking to deal one back into the 3rd round? Would that be an ideal scenario here?
One idea I've kicked around, and you and I kind of talked about this briefly on Twitter, is what do they do with Rasul Douglas?
Oh, don't.
Do they move him? Do they move him potentially for a 3rd round pick? You're starting to hear a little bit of chatter about Nelson Aguilar. Do they potentially move him? I don't know. As of right now, without anything, firmly in place, I'm going to say that they stay where they are. And if they stay at 53, I would ideally like Titus Howard. And at 57, I would like Juan Thornhill.
Wow, okay. So we're not going... Okay, that makes... I suppose if we're going through this and we go an offensive line round 1 or whatever, or defensive end round 1, what would you say... Oh, no, it's interesting because I had Eric Crocker on yesterday's show. So we focused the entire podcast on defensive backs and the Eagles and the draft. And he had Thornhill as his number 1 ranked safety. And this is a guy that's obviously played at the professional level for a bit, Arena Bowl champion, now has his own kind of analysis podcast. It was interesting to hear that Thornhill came out not just above Savage, but above Adderley and Gardner-Johnson as well. Where do you see him in that kind of realm? Is this going to be a steal at 57?
I agree with Eric. I think it would be a steal at 57. Actually, I got to see Darnell Savage, Nasir Adderley, and Juan Thornhill on my pro day rounds, and I was most impressed with Juan Thornhill. I actually had a chance to talk to Juan one-on-one, and I was very impressed with his high football IQ. he was able to rattle off a game from 2 years ago against Lamar Jackson on a play he would like to have had back. And he was walking me through the play, what he would have done differently. And I just came away really impressed with Juan.
You know that if you ever get to talk to him again when he's an Eagle, if this happens, you have to call it a one-on-one, right?
Yeah, you have to.
It's just the law now. But it's really interesting to hear, because I feel safety is another one of those positions where it's quite polarising this year. A lot of people at the start of the protest were all in on Nasir Adderley, and I couldn't tell if that was because he's a local kid or because he's just an absolute machine. I was a bit more sold on Darnell Savage, but now he's soared up draft boards. When I was first interested in him, he was projected 3rd, 4th round. So now he's getting up in there. I think Gardner Johnson would give them the perfect versatile option. The issue would be tackling consistency that I'm worried about, especially with McLeod not exactly having his best season prior to injury. But I don't know. I mean, if you had to choose now between Gardner Johnson or Adderley or Thornhill, so it doesn't matter what the pick is, which one are you going for to start week 1?
I'm going with Juan Thornhill.
Really?
I think he's in the mold of a Malcolm Jenkins. Like Gardner Johnson, he also has cornerback background. He tested in the 99.5 percentile for NFL safeties. And, I think there's a lot more room for him to grow. I don't even think he scratched the surface with how good he can be. And, when I talked to him, he actually told me, he was like, that was when he was rattling off these names of all these different, top 30 visits that he was at. And I was just like, no Philly? And he was like, I was actually at Philly maybe 2 weeks ago. And he's like, and the safety coach, Tim Howell, came down here to give me a private workout. So I'm like, wow, okay. This one kind of flew a little bit under the radar. Chauncey's was more public. This one was kind of flew under the radar a little bit. So it kind of makes you wonder why this one was a little bit more discreet.
Yeah, I've honestly kind of got a bit more unique perspective on this whole process now. So because alongside Philly Sports Network, I've taken up a job just working part-time for a few hours a week under an NFL agent and just helping provide content for his clients to prepare them for interviews and that sort of thing. And knowing how that side of it works now, how the teams show interest and the way they approach it, it's been really interesting to see how the Eagles go about it in comparison to other teams. So there was one player that got a workout with the Ravens, and the way that workout was scheduled was very minimal, not much contact at all. Then he went down to the Texans, who were a lot more hands-on, a lot more in your face, a lot more coaches involved, wanting to get a real profile on the guy. And that, to me, like you can see, I guess, from your instinct with pro days and how that works, that the Eagles are a lot more hands-on than a lot of the other teams out there.
I would agree with that. Yeah, it seems like, you saw that with Jeff Stoutland going down to Alabama State to put Titus Howard through his pro day workout, and you see, they brought in Darnell Savage and some of these, like a lot of these safety options there into the NovaCare facility. So they're doing their due diligence on these guys.
I find this whole process honestly so fascinating from start to finish, whether it's from talent evaluation or the talent itself or the stories, but especially a lot of these guys overlook the fact they've just come out of college, they've got their degrees or whatever. They're now essentially working a full-time job for free between now and the NFL draft. It's workouts every single day for like 5-6 hours. Then they have to maybe fly to meet a team or wait for interviews. And it's this entirely different dynamic. And I find that the players who handle that the best mentally often end up rising up draft boards really late. It's when you get to the interviews, like the pro day and combine, you get, oh, he ran a 40 really quickly, or oh, he did a great vertical. Wait a couple of weeks and you'll hear, oh, this team are in love with this guy. They love his character. And those are the guys that rise up most latest, right? Yes. And,
it's funny you mentioned that, Liam, because when I was standing there when he was doing his presser, Juan Thornhill, that is, and someone asked him, they said, Juan, this whole process must be a little stressful for you. And he answered it by saying, no, I don't look at it as stressful. I look at it as an opportunity. I'm just very fortunate to play this game and have teams that are interested in me.
Wow, so it's that perception piece, isn't it? It's once you get that shift in like an eyebrow raise, you're like, okay, right, now the rest of it comes into question.
Right.
So if we go a little bit deeper, and this is where your territory really heats up, I'm like, your probably lips are salivating at this point, heart of the draft and beyond for the sleepers and the steals. Round 4 is a very important one for the Eagles, purely because, as we know, they don't have that 3rd round pick right now. One of the guys I'm quite impressed with at this point now is Riley Ridley, purely because of his route running. And I've flexed a little bit in round 4 recently between different positions, but I can see it happening. I think the route running of Riley Ridley alone is so sensual, it's ridiculous.
I love Riley Ridley. I hope he's there at round 4. I hope Miles Boykin's there at round 4 because those are two guys that I really like, and I would offer tremendous value in the 4th round. You also look at, if those guys aren't there, you look at a Stanley Wilson or Stanley Morgan Jr. from Nebraska, who, in my opinion, is the best route runner in this entire draft. You look at maybe Nelson Aguilar not being here next year or for the foreseeable future, and I think he would just be a plug and play in the slot.
That's really cool to know. Okay, so let's really quickly talk about the Eagles wide receivers then. So as of right now, massive payroll. You've got Nelson Aguilar in the slot. Desean Jackson won't be around forever. They should get 2 or 3 good years out of him before you end up either discussing a contract renewal or free agency or what have you. In this draft in particular, knowing there is a lot of depth, especially when you get towards slot, like the Eagles have met with a bunch of big slot guys. We're talking like AJ Brown, Jaylen Hurd, to name a couple. If you're on that team right now and you're going to pound the table for one receiver, are you looking for a speed guy, someone to kind of take the edge off, maybe like an Emmanuel Hall out of Missouri, or instead are you looking to maybe reinforce behind Nelson Aguilar?
I'm looking to reinforce behind Nelson Aguilar. Obviously you like Andy Isabella just as much as I do, but I don't necessarily think he's an option. But but I just love his route running, and he's just the most exciting player I've seen on tape this whole process. But I would say that they would look for like a slot option. Hopefully, like Deebo Samuel, who I was fortunate enough to have a chance to speak to throughout this process. He would be my ideal option if they get one in the 2nd round.
This is what I really like about this Eagles team now, though, and the way they draft specifically, is that the skill positions get left later and later, and it really just adds this ounce of almost confusion into it, because you get to running back and you're like, well, they've never really found the franchise guy after LaShawn McCoy because they've never drafted one. I'm still of the opinion that the massive DeMarco Murray payday haunted them a bit, and we're like, okay, let's never do that again. And ever since then, this whole running back by committee has been fine, but all the players have either been cheap free agents like circa Jordan Howard, or it's been guys in the heart of the draft or beyond, like a Wendell Smallwood or a Corey Clement, or I hate to say Donnell Pumphrey, but yeah. And you've now really get to a point where surely you have to invest in a position to get the most out of it. And they finally did it this year with wide receiver 2. We had the failed Torrey Smith experiment. We had Dorial Green Beckham as a wide receiver 2 at one point. That was fun. And, then we've got Mike Wallace. Now they've finally invested capital. Do they do that in the slot now, or would they view Nelson Aguilar's $9 million contract as investment enough for now? Bearing in mind you've still got Mac Hollins, who a lot of people forget was quite prevalent in the slot during his time with the Eagles.
It's hard to see them moving on from Nelson, but I also, on the other side of that coin, it's really hard for me to imagine Howie Roseman being able to stomach paying Nelson Aguilar $9.5 million. But with that being said, you don't know what you have in Mac Hollins, because he shined, but it was very brief in 2017, and Shelton Gibson hasn't worked out. So then you look at your options and you're like, well, we have a known commodity in Nelson, so can we really afford to throw another rookie, to throw a rookie in there while he's, the learning curve for a rookie receiver isn't always the easiest.
I honestly find it so perplexing, the Eagles wide receiver position, because there's so many ways you can view it. And there are a lot of guys, like you mentioned, we've got Penny Hart is another one who I am still in love with. As long as Penny Hart gets drafted somewhere, I'm happy. But there are a lot of guys that would fit that slot mold, and some of them are smaller and more shifty, like an Andy Isabella. Others are these more STEM bullies. Would you kind of try to replace Nelson Aguilar directly in terms of a crisp route runner with a big catch radius with speed, or do you go for that shiftier option? Because obviously Andy Isabella is much more of a space player who you can dominate you on screens and sweeps and all the rest of it, which is sort of what the Eagles tried to use Aguilar as. He became this gadget player once Golden Tate arrived.
Yeah, I'm looking at more of a gadget player, kind of like what you were saying. You look at your Penny Harts, look at your Andy Isabellas and players like that. Look at your Greg Dortches from Wake Forest. Those are some players that I think can add a different dynamic to the offense, where you can't really plan for you can't plan for the jet sweeps and all the different things that they're able to do.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to see how whoever gets drafted is going to be implemented. So, all right, we'll move on from that 4th round pick. Obviously, there's another one a couple picks later. In that pick, so pick 138, unless there's going to be a massive trade or something, I'm quite sold on David Long at this point, purely because, obviously, I know linebacker is not the biggest need for this team, and I think the fact they've not met with a single round 1 prospect symbolises that. I liken it to the Chargers defense. Like, I put this on Twitter recently. I want to do a massive feature on it. But there was a game last year, so the Chargers beat the Ravens in the playoffs, where I think they had 7 defensive backs on the field for like over 60% of the time just to account for Lamar Jackson and marginalize it. That's going to be a blessing and a curse. You can't do that every game, obviously. But the way the Eagles' defense is moving, where they've got such a plethora of DB talent, they know they've got Nigel Bradham as a cornerstone. They like what they have in Nate Jerry. And I suppose that, Camu Grugier-Hill's come on leaps and bounds, and Paul Warrilow can hold the fort if need be with LJ Fort. It just makes sense to go a bit smaller and lighter. But David Long, to me, is almost built like a defensive back.
I agree.
Like, the guy is, like, just flies around. So he's not going to sit in a zone look and be like a Jordan Hicks and pick off passes and read the game and wait for tight ends. But if you want him to get to a sideline and stop a screen on Saquon Barkley, there's no better linebacker suited to it other than, in my opinion, like a Blake Cashman.
Right. David Long's a guy I really like, and Ulysses Gilbert from Akron's a player I really like, and I've gotten a chance to get to know throughout this process. He's 6'1", 225, runs a 4.5 flat. And he jumps a 39-inch vertical. He's crazy athletic, and he kind of fits the mold of the modern linebacker in today's game. That's that hybrid role, that Mark Barron, that Deion Buchanan type role. And I think he would also match up well, with some of the more athletic tight ends and tracking running backs out of the backfield as well.
If the Eagles don't draft a running back and they don't invest one, let's say between now and week 1 of the regular season, how much impact will that have on how good or bad this defense is, do you think?
Liam, I was having a chat with somebody yesterday, and it wouldn't surprise me. If you listen to Howie Roseman's comments at the pre-draft meeting, he sounds really content with the guys that he has in the house. Now, that could all be a smokescreen, I understand, but then you also look at the lack of – historically, they haven't prioritized that position. So it wouldn't surprise me if they come out of this draft without a running back, unless they do acquire like an extra pick or something along the line. There's going to be a lot of talent that slips through the cracks at the end of this draft. Your Darren Halls from Pitt, your Ty Johnsons from Maryland, and your Nick Brissett from LSU, who the Eagles actually put through a private workout. So there's going to be some guys there that if they really want to, they could probably get some value there at the end of the draft.
No, I just love this process. There are so many kind of ifs, buts, and maybes all around it. You get to the 5th round, and this is where I think you come into your own now when you've got these lower-rated guys, the sleepers that typically at this point start to get a lot of NFL attention because they're looking for potential undrafted free agents from 6th round typically and beyond to kind of say, hey, if you fall, we're your team, we're going to call you straight away. 5th round's still that value though. 5th round you're trying to find the sleepers that everyone's missed or the guys that slip through the cracks. At this point, for me, it's Jaylen Jelks at defensive end. I feel like if you don't take one earlier, I think Jelks is going to be enough of a role player to kind of put into certain like sub packages where he's got the speed and the length to kind of leverage in pass rushing looks. And the fact that I think off the top of my head it was like 15.5 tackles for a loss in 2017. I think that alone would benefit the Eagles because they've got a guy that can just sweep in off the side and clean up, especially if you bring down an extra DB or something. But is there a guy in the 5th round that you're quite high on or that you would want to see snapped up in a heartbeat?
I do like Jelks. Malik Carney from UNC is a defensive end that I really like. And I'm also going to go back to my guy Mike Doggy from Temple. If you wait on a defensive tackle, that'd be a great value right there. I understand that the Jaguars and the Falcons have expressed a lot of interest in Mike, but Mike's a guy who he didn't get that combine invite, but he tore it up at his pro day, at Temple's pro day. 34 reps on bench press. He's one of the strongest defensive linemen in the entire draft. 284, he can move well, he can play defensive end, he can play defensive tackle, very violent hands, quick off the ball. I think he'd be a good rotational piece. So those are some guys I'm looking at.
There's a lot of running. I know we keep talking about running backs, but especially 5th round and beyond, we're going to talk about Decicco, and I think that's your trigger word at this point. I think you know it was going to come up. The minute we say the word Decicco, you're just going to lose it.
I was hoping you were going to go there. Yeah, I love Decicco. He's a top 10. There's no secret there. He's a top 10 running back on my board, and I just love what he brings to the table. He compares his game to Arian Foster. To me, he reminds me of a Michael Turner, a bigger back that can do some of the things that a smaller back can do, get skinny through the hole, catch the ball well, good vision, loose hips, all those things you like to see. And, based on our conversation that he and I have had, he has been a little bit underlooked throughout this process. The Minnesota Vikings and the Cleveland Browns have really looked at him, but he said, maybe you have some teams that think, was this a one-year wonder, and some of the things like that.
Yeah, and it's such a hard stigma to kind of overcome when you've got teams that are going to constantly hold that against you. Other players in this sort of realm, obviously Raquel Armstead could be an option from Temple. I know that's another guy that you've spoken to as well, right?
Yeah, Raquel Armstead's great. He looked a lot more nimble than I thought he would at Temple's Pro Day. Deuce Staley put him through his workout. He caught the ball a lot better than I thought he would as well. I think he'd be a good balance, a good complement to Jordan Howard and the Eagles offense.
That's a good point. So into round 6, no matter what mock draft I've done, have got the Eagles picking up a quarterback purely because they want to get back to drafting one every year. And as much as Sean McVay like Luis Perez and now Doug Peterson's like Luis Perez, I didn't see anything of note during his time in the AAF other than the fact that he can throw a nice deep ball. So for me, I don't think Luis Perez is going to be your next Nate Sudfeld. So looking at the quarterbacks around that sort of range, I suppose are going to see guys like Clayton Thornton and stuff like that. But Brett Ripien, for me, is the closest to that sort of build. He's not going to be as nimble, but he reminds me a lot of Nick Foles. He's a game manager. He's deadly accurate at like 67% pass completion. And he's not going to maneuver the pocket or do the wizarding moves, but he knows his limitations. He's not got the strongest arm, so he'll just take what's available to him. And that, at the next level, could be the most translatable skill that a quarterback has. If you're not going to be too aggressive or put yourself in harm's way to make humiliating interceptions, like, I don't know, Nate Peterman, then I think Brett Ripien in the right system could have a really nice sort of development cycle.
I like Brett a lot. I like Easton Stick a lot. Those are two guys. I know you've mocked Easton Stick to the Eagles as well.
Yeah.
Those are two quarterbacks that I had the opportunity to watch at the East-West Shrine game, and they got better as the week went on. They're sharp players. They like you said, they don't have necessarily the big arms they're going to draw scouts, towards them, but they do have that innate football IQ. Easton Stick, I asked him, I said, what did you learn from Carson Wentz? And he said, I learned the process of winning and how it's done. I learned how to make checks at the line. I learned to always have a plan when I go to the line of scrimmage. He seemed like a very well aware, very knowledgeable, and very astute player.
It's good. I mean, the one I can't tell if it's a concern or not with Easton Stick that I would have is because he's kind of been under Carson Wentz the majority of his career. To then come out, do what he did at North Dakota State, to then go back into that environment where you've got no real chance of winning a QB1 role. You're not going to start right away. He's going to be aware of that given his current position. But would it not be seen as going back into... You want something fresh, right? This is like the biggest chapter of your life. If you get drafted, it's, like a 100K signing bonus. It's an exciting time. If you go straight back into an environment when you're a clear number 2 to the same guy again, from a personal perspective, it's sort of like leaving a job to get a better job and then having the same boss. And you're like, if you like the boss, fine, but you're going to surely have the same limitations, right?
Right, and Easton can certainly look at it two different ways. He can look at it as, hey, I want a fresh start. I want a chance to emerge from the shadows a little bit. Or he could look at it as saying, hey, this is my, I'm going to a new job. Here's a familiar face. Here's he said Carson Wentz was a good friend of his. He could say, hey, I'm going to be reunited with my friend, and he can show me the ropes on how to be a pro.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to see how that kind of translates. Okay, so on to quarterbacks really quickly. I know Carson Wentz has been one of the most polarizing offseason names for whatever reason. I still can't fully understand why. But looking at his offseason in particular, where the article came out that it was like a big dirt sheet on him more than anything. It was almost like one of those wrestling shoot podcasts where everyone was just like kind of digging into him, which was really bizarre. But the way he handled that and what's happened since, and recently the McNabb comments, I know there's pressure on Carson Wentz in 2019. There's almost two ways of viewing this, I feel like now. You've got the one half where it feels like Carson Wentz is wrapped in bubble wrap and no one can say a bad word about him, which I understand. There's the other half where it feels like people are unnecessarily piling on pressure that isn't there. And it's a really fine line to sit in the middle between and say, hey, we know it's his contract year, we know he hasn't been healthy for a couple years, but we also know his potential. My biggest question is when the Eagles pay him, not so much whether the pressure's there, because we already know that's there. That's no hidden fact. But it feels like you can't have an opinion without being cast into one of those two categories. Right,
and I agree with that as well. I would say the one thing that I've taken from this throughout this whole process is how Carson has handled the situation, taking it in stride, taking ownership for some of the things in that article, and he's handled it like a pro, which, maybe you look at somebody like the previous quarterbacks that have been in the city and maybe they didn't necessarily handle it with the same poise.
It would have been interesting to see how Donovan McNabb would have handled that scenario. Just looking back, obviously he's made the comments that he has now. That would have been... I can't see that ending too well.
I can imagine. I can imagine how he'd handle it.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been pretty. But that Donovan McNabb piece, we'll quickly just touch on that. That was interesting. I feel like his actual reasoning made no sense, but the points were valid. And it's sort of like, when you do a math exam and they're like, right, you've got the right answer, but 5 points if you show you're working. And he just didn't show the work in at all and just kind of made it up, but he knew he had the right answer. That was sort of what happened. I mean, do you think that those comments hold weight, or was it just unnecessarily digging? Because a lot of it for me was taken out of context. When you read the actual quotes in full, they're not that far-fetched from the truth. But the reasoning of saying, playoff wins are how a quarterback's judged, I think is the most barbaric thing. That it's just sort of like forgetting how to write your name on the exam sheet, let alone not doing working out.
That's been Donovan McNabb in a nutshell. A lot of times you leave those press conferences after you watch it, and you're kind of scratching your head. You're like, what was he talking about?
Yeah.
How do you like? I don't even know. I didn't know where he was going with that answer. And I think that I certainly think that it was a little bit overblown by the media. You have to show the whole context of what he was saying. Yeah. The point, like you said, was certainly valid, but I definitely think that how he got to that conclusion made absolutely no sense to me.
So talking about the polarizing topics then, we mentioned this briefly earlier. Obviously, Rasul Douglas is a name I think we share the same opinion on, where I think a lot of people do. He's definitely viewed differently by the fans and the coaches and the media and whoever. There's kind of different pools of Rasul fans here. But I still can't fully understand what's going on there. And I spoke to Eric Crocker yesterday, and he was like, a lot of it could be off the field stuff or effort levels in practice that the coaches don't like. And that would correlate with what I heard previously with the whole Ronald Darby benching thing and Rasul being a little bit frustrated when Darby came back in 2017 and took a while to settle back into a groove, where I think it's sort of like better, like I could have done better sort of thing. But whether that carries over for an entire year, the fact that Dexter McDougal was brought in off the street, ran into Jordan Hicks, like just not knowing he was there, just sprinted into him on a snap. Like, surely there has to be a point where Rasul Douglas is better than that first. Like, something must have happened along the way for the Eagles to go, we're going to bring in a corner off the street who hasn't played a snap since last August. So we'll see how we go from there before we get to the guy that's been on this team constantly,
Yeah, that Dexter McDougal experiment was certainly failed. He didn't stand a chance from the first time he stepped on the field. I didn't understand that one. Now you have a player with Rasul. Every time he's on the field, he seems to make something happen. He seems to turn the tides or shift momentum in some way. His energy seems to radiate throughout the secondary. Now it's the most perplexing situation that I could currently on the roster right now that I can't quite wrap my head around. You have this player with all this immense ability, but he's not on the field, and they keep finding solutions to ahead of him to put on the field instead of him. Now, I kind of would have to agree with what Eric said. Maybe there's something going on behind the scenes there. Practice habits, attitude. Maybe he's not happy with his playing time, or maybe he's going about it the wrong way by voicing his opinion. Things like that.
It's honestly so confusing, and we went from a season where, like this time 12 months ago, it was right, let's move Rasul Douglas to safety. Here's all the reasons why. I was pounding that table pretty hard. That never happened. And then it just kind of, it's like they just take the mick that much more. It's like they've kind of gone, all right, everyone's a bit annoyed about this now. Let's see how far we can push it before everyone has a meltdown. And I think he's probably one of the most likely players to be traded between now and day 3 of the draft alongside Nelson Aguilar. But sure, I mean, a fresh start. This is sort of like Eric Rowe all over again. Is it not? I mean, like Eric Rowe, for me, I don't think he put a foot wrong in Philadelphia. I thought he was quite solid. Went to the Patriots and started doing quite well for himself. I know that's been a roller coaster in itself ever since, but it's another one of those just bizarre situations where there aren't many logical arguments at face value. It'd have to be something a bit deeper than that.
Yeah, he even looks like Eric. Same numbers, but
It's the curse of 32. That's what it is.
Yeah, like if that's exactly what I saw in Rasul Douglas. I was like, oh, another Eric Rowe. But so like what I don't understand is how they can draft somebody and bring him into the building, knowing that they're not really going to give him much of an opportunity, and then when he does get an opportunity, they decide that they don't want to put him out there. It's really, I've tried to connect the dots here, and I've come up empty. It certainly seems like he's on the outs. So he can be a starter for somebody.
Absolutely.
I would have to believe.
Yeah. And I think the big shocking thing was that emergency in tackling as well. Like when he first came back in and was dropped back into the deep end, and he become this machine. And Jim Schwartz was like, yeah, he's done well. He's had some bad points as well. He's had some bad. And it's like, whoa, dude, the guy just had like 13 tackles 2 games in a row. Like, lay off him a bit. It's perplexing.
Yeah, I don't know if they're trying to motivate him like that way, if they're trying to give him some tough love, but like it's really bizarre.
Absolutely. All right, so back onto the NFL draft really quickly. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Who is your biggest draft crush right now?
Oh man, can I give you like 5?
You go for it, dude. As long as they're written in like love poem format, then absolutely.
So you want sleepers, or do you want like players that are pretty well known?
Oh, give me one of each.
Okay, I'll just give you a handful of them. So I'll go with So I'll give you the ones that there's no secret that I love. We'll go with Thomas Howard, Andy Isabella, Devine Ezigbo, Mike Dogby, Trey Watson, and Ulysses Gilbert. Those are just some off the top of my head that I know that I really like, besides some of the more obvious ones, and then some under the radar ones that because you also see a lot of potential in this players. Donnie Lewis Jr., Jimmy Moreland. We really like Jordan Brown. I think Jordan Brown's about 6'1", 200 pounds. He told me going against Dallas Goedert in practice every day last year made him a better player. He fits the mold of an outside corner. He's very fluid. Blaze Brown's another corner I like. If you can notice a trend here, I feel like they may look at a corner in the 6th round.
I can't think of what pattern we're going with there.
Some of these guys.
Okay,
and of course Daniel Wise.
Yeah, that's a big one. All right, so bold predictions out of this week. So what's the most shocking thing you could see happening from the Eagles this week?
I believe that there's a chance that one, they trade up. They trade up for maybe a Brian Burns or something. And I also think there's a legitimate chance they come out of this draft without a running back. How angry would the fans be if that happened?
Oh, don't. I mean, I think we've just about got over Dalvin Cook a couple of years ago. We've just about, I think most fans have swallowed the idea that they took Donnell Pumphrey and then Marlon Mack slipped through and a couple other guys. If this is a 3rd year now where something like this happens, it would be a meltdown. It would be overblown, but it would be a meltdown.
I also think there's a player that not many people have really matched with the Eagles, but maybe Rocky Sin. There's been a lot of rumblings about cornerback maybe being on the Eagles' radar, and I think why not roll the dice on a homegrown talent at the top of the 2nd round.
All right, okay. So here's my other question then. For months we've had Eagles being mock drafted corners in round 1, and no one can really work out why. The only logic I've got now is given this whole, I suppose it's a perception piece of realising that you've got that many DBs. If you do move Maddox to safety, you still, after 2020, things get murky because you're going to lose both Jalen Mills and Ronald Darby to begin with. Whether you bring them back or not, that's a different debate. You're then left with Sidney Jones, who is still playing in the nickel, which worries me a little bit. You're then going to be left with probably not Rasul Douglas, let's be honest at this point, and a few other guys as well. Yeah. So is there a long-term argument to take a corner in round 1, and would the City have an equally large meltdown?
I think when they take a step back and look at it, kind of like how you broke it down, you have to see that there's a need for a corner, an outside corner there. You have your Crayvon LeBlanc there in the nickel. You have your Maddox on the outside there. I think you need another outside guy. You talk about Ronald Darby. He's still injured. He's still coming along. And you have Jalen Mills, who's still in a walking boot. And let's not forget, he just got in trouble, and that's still working itself out. So all of a sudden, and then you have C.D. Jones, who hasn't really lived up to expectations. So all of a sudden, your top three guys, there's question marks.
That's it. All right, so really quickly, I'm honestly trying to ask everyone who comes on this show the same question now, because I genuinely cannot tell at this point if my opinion of Ronald Darby is so wayward or if anyone's actually agreed with it right now. Ronald Darby, being paid the money is, we'll get past the money for now, but should the Eagles have brought him back, yes or no, and why?
I like Ronald Darby as a player, but I don't necessarily think this is the system for him. He's not an off-the-ball corner. He could be more efficient in a system where he can be a press corner. Right, like you were saying.
That's it. And it's, for some reason, I don't get if it's some writers or beat writers. I know not every beat writer has time to watch all 22 and stuff, right? Like, I think we're quite lucky in that regard, as it's almost become integral to what we do. Right. But I know there are some. I mean, for me, the idea of having Jaylen Mills one side and Ronald Darby the other, where you've got one that is a supreme tackler but bites on everything and gets burned deep, and the other one that has got hips as fluid as anything, can cover anybody but can't tackle consistently. You pick your poison. If you want to go underneath, you attack Darby. You want to go deep, you attack Mills. There's no balance. There's no kind of masking what you're going to do with a defensive back, because you know what you're getting with each one. And if you can live with that, fine. But I feel like there's got to be something more to that than, paying Ronald Darby that much money. When you, on the other hand, I think if you put Mills and Douglas together, where they're two similar skill sets, but Douglas is a bit more ferocious around the ball, or Sidney Jones, who again combines that secure tackling with a bit more coverage speed, you get a bit more masking with it.
Yeah, I agree. Throughout training camp, they're going to have to mix and match and find an answer here. But I also do think that, kind of like what you were saying, they do need to find that corner just in case, their plan going into camp doesn't work out. You look at a longer corner who's very fluid and athletic, like a Sean Bunting from Central Michigan, who I'm really high on, or Rocky Sin. And I think you have to have that plan in place in the event that something doesn't work out, or you get an offer for Rasul Douglas that you can't pass up.
Yeah, so Eric yesterday had his bold prediction for the draft was that Sean Bunting would go ahead of Greedy Williams.
I think Sean Bunting can sneak his way into the back end of the first round. He's a top 50 player on my board regardless. I really like him, and I think that he could certainly be in play for some teams at the back end of the first. He seems like a Patriots move to me.
Oh, okay, that's an interest. Okay, we'll see how that one pans out for sure. All right, so outside of that big move or like the shocking trade, is there a player that if I was to give you $1,000 right now and say, right, put it on this player being drafted by the Eagles, would you feel comfortable putting it on a player, like any player in any round?
Oh man, my heart wants to say Titus Howard, but I feel like they really like Marquise Brown.
Yeah.
So I think I would have to put money on Marquise Brown.
Wow. Okay. How would that go down? Because, I mean, that in itself would be quite a polarizing move, right, Hollywood? I think Hollywood Brown's got that skill set that everyone loves, but it's that... I find for me, like, the most attractive trait now in a wide receiver is the play. And I feel like the minute that gets overshadowed by the spectacle, it can kind of have negative connotations. Like, would you agree with that or not? Or am I, again, overblowing it?
Yeah, I agree with that. And to take it a step further, you look at the drops that Marquise Brown had. First of all, I wouldn't necessarily be a fan of this move. It's hard to justify taking a 166-pound receiver in the first round. Yeah, you have a Desean Jackson, that worked out, but for every Desean Jackson, there's a John Ross.
Oh, man,
or Darius Hayward Bay.
That's the team we like spelled.
You know?
Oh, it's crazy. That's a good shout. Okay, so the last question that I'm going to ask you, right now, if you were going to pick one player, one sleeper that's going to have a long-term NFL career, who would it be? Like the highest ceiling NFL career.
I'm going to go with Trey Watson, the linebacker from Maryland.
Yeah.
I think his style of play fits right in with what the Ravens like to do, that downhill thumper. I think that, and Trey's a guy that told me, he goes, listen, I'm not an uber athlete, but put me on the board, put me in front of coaches, put me in the meeting room. That's where I can really make up the most ground. Where he makes up his most ground between the ears. He's a very bright player, and he comes downhill, and he does not miss tackles.
I love that. That's a great shout. Andrew DiCecco, it has been a pleasure having you on this show. Just for everyone that maybe hasn't been following you, or you're very Philly apparently looking for Zeke just yet, where can guys check out your work?
Yeah, check me out on the Eagles Wire. You could have some cool things going on through there, some draft prospect profiles. I have an article dropping tomorrow morning on Donnie Lewis Jr. if you want to find out about an under-the-radar DB. And, feel free to give me a follow on Twitter, DiCecco NFL. That's DiCecco NFL.
I'm still really happy I pronounced that right, because I was saying to you before, I've got a real problem with pronouncing names. Just for context, so the biggest blunder I ever had, right? I used to do TV commentary. So
I was really impressed with that.
I was impressed. I used to do motorsport commentary, right? So like broadcasting. And I think I was 19 at the time, and it was a live broadcast, it was on television, and we come back from an ad break, and the guy I was commentating with was called Charlie Butler Henderson. And I come back and I'm like, welcome back to the race, we're live here at Silverstone, myself, Liam Jenkins, and my co-commentator, Charlie Hender Butlerson, and he just looked at me, and I was like, I am so sorry. So I'm just completely ruined that on live television. My Twitter was a mess for about 2-3 weeks after it was. So I've come a long way since then. It's good to know.
You certainly have, man.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, honestly, thank you so much for taking some time to come out. Just also a note as well, if you're not following Andrew already, the fact that he's taken a week vacation and on his first day has come onto an Eagles podcast for an hour. That's worth a follow in itself. So go and follow him if you're not already. Andrew, it's been a pleasure.
The pleasure's all mine. I had a lot of fun. Thanks again.